So, I'm not going to lie. I'm not the type of person to watch sitcoms or anything like that at all. I just never really found them all that funny from the clips I tend to see on YouTube Shorts. And I don't know how the algorithm does it, but it somehow manages to destroy my recommendations with clips from shows I don't even watch. Hell, recently it's been showing me something called Forget About It, and it showed me so much of it that I have learned the entire plot of the show against my will. So, yeah, interesting relationship with sitcoms. That being said, there is one sitcom I unironically like. Brooklyn Nine-Nine pretty much stands out as the one sitcom that I do genuinely enjoy without any hint of irony. It's got great characters with just as strong development, heartwarming and emotional moments, awesome action scenes, and of course, really funny moments I quote on a daily basis. I've watched this series all the way through to the extent that many of the series' most iconic moments I can pretty much just glance at and immediately tell which episode it's from. That being said, like with any type of media, watching something for so long will give one the desire to critique its shortcomings, and Brooklyn Nine-Nine is no exception. Yeah, despite the glowing praise I just gave it, it's not a perfect show. There's episodes that I do think are stinkers, and I do want to discuss them. However, I don't want to do a countdown since I've already been doing that with my House Kitchen series, so I decided to try something a bit different. I'm going to look back at every season, pick out the episode from a season that I think is the worst, and briefly talk about it. Before starting this, I just need to make clear that this is just my opinion. You may very well like some of the episodes I'm talking about, and that's okay. Hell, some of the episodes I'm going to talk about I don't even think are bad, they're just the least good of the season for me. Anyway, let's start with Season 1. Season 1 is pretty good, all things considered. Sure, a lot of the episodes this season I wouldn't consider to be all-time classics, but it's still a good season nonetheless. That being said though, there was one episode that I did ultimately feel wasn't up to par with the rest. In The Vulture, the squad must deal with the titular Vulture, an extremely obnoxious major crimes detective who always takes the credit for cases that are nearly completed, while Holt and Gina try to help Terry deal with his shooting problems. To start with the positives, I actually like the subplot of the episode. Andre Braugher and Terry Crews just have this amazing chemistry together, and I think this subplot is a good example of it. This episode does also have some pretty good crime solving as in the main plot, and the cold open is just a classic. That being said though, my big problem this episode is with the titular Vulture. I understand that he's supposed to be obnoxious and irritating to deal with, but that doesn't change the fact that he's obnoxious and irritating. What also doesn't help is that he kind of wins at the end of the episode, and unfortunately that seems to be a common trend with him. The dude just never gets consequences. Sure, he does on occasion, but outside of something like Operation Broken Feather, Yippee Kayak, or The Venue, he tends to get away scot-free. Also, I know I praised the subplot, but this also starts the whole character trait of Gina being way too handsy with Terry, and if I don't like it here, then I'm not gonna like it anywhere else. That being said, I don't think this episode is bad. I think it's an okay episode overall, but it's my least favorite just being the most okay episode so far, and my issues with the Vulture. Season 2 was actually kind of tricky for two reasons. Reason one is because there's no episodes this season that I would consider outright bad, which again speaks to the quality of the show. The second reason is because a lot of the episodes this season just kind of are close to each other in terms of quality. Sure, there's some really good ones like The Boy Lene Wedding, The Beach House, Chocolate Milk, and my personal favorite AC/DC, but the rest are super close in terms of good that it was really tricky to decide. So once more, I'm going with the episode I just found the least good. In Stakeout, Jake and Charles volunteer to do a stakeout for 8 days, which tests their friendship as they have to deal with their own traits and quirks. Meanwhile, Amy and Gina get upset at Terry for making bad characterizations of them in his book, although I think Gina's is pretty damn accurate, and Rosa meets Holt's nephew Marcus, who's about as interesting as Ariel Font, and forms a relationship with him. Starting with positives once more, I like the subplots. Rosa's subplot is personally my favorite simply because of the chemistry between Stephanie Beatriz and Andre Braugher. The two play off each other extremely well and would go on to have some of the more emotional scenes in the show. Man, now I'm just being reminded that Andre Bauer is no longer with us. This sucks. The Terry subplot I also like, especially the ending where Terry pretty much says you're getting bent out of shape because of drawings. Also, the cold open is funny as always. The Holton 1 stuff is always the stuff of legend. What hurts this episode for me is honestly the main plot. I know it's a relatively simple concept for a sitcom, and it would make sense for Jake and Charles to have a conflict at some point, but my issue is that you can kinda tell where the plot is going in the first 10 minutes. Jake and Charles are going to get sick of each other because they're trades, they'll have a fallout, and by the end of the episode, they will have made up. Sure, they tried doing something a little different with it, tried to use the no-load list so they don't fall into that trap, but you can still tell it's going to happen. It also doesn't help that there's way better episodes where their friendship is tested, like Memento. Again, it's not a bad episode, and in fact, I actually do like this episode for the subplots alone, and the main plot itself isn't the worst, it's just the least good for me. Thankfully, Season 3 was a bit less tricky to decide which episode was the worst because there were two that stuck out in my mind. It was either the episode I went with, or the funeral, since, again, I don't like Vulture plotlines that much. That being said, however, the Terran Holt subplot saved it a whole lot. As for the episode I did choose... yeah, I know there's some people who may find this episode good, but honestly, I just find it extremely not good. I felt the subplots were kind of forgettable to me. Like, I can barely recall anything that happens in this episode outside the main plot. Amy breaks Terry's nose, I guess, while Gina catches up with an old classmate that is a perp. So, let's start with positives. It's got a pretty damn funny cold open where Holt emotes on a guy. I think the Holt and Rosa subplot ends in a funny-ass way, which reveals Rosa got the perp to talk because they couldn't stand Gina. They play AC/DC at one point, which reminds me of a better episode. Yeah, that's about it. I think my main issue is, again, with the main plot, it's just how it barrel rolls poor Charles. I know Charles is usually the butt monkey, and he may not be everyone's favorite character, but learning about how his life has been destroyed by his ex is just really heartbreaking, and I think it just puts a damper on the mood for me. Not only that, I don't know if this is the same for anyone else, maybe I'm looking too far into it, but from how much we learn about how much Charles' life sucks and how his ex is pretty much controlling him, it almost feels like I'm supposed to be laughing at what is essentially an abuse victim. Again, maybe it's just me looking way too far into it because Jesus Christ, I do not like Boyle's wife in the slightest. And yes, I know it's intentional, but goddamn, at least the Vulture had funny lines. As such, throughout most of the episode, I just didn't find it very funny. So far, this is the episode I like the least, and it's shocking that this isn't actually a pretty good season. Who knows, maybe that'll change, but for now, it's definitely the worst so far. I'm not going to lie, Season 4 was a very okay season for me. Not a bad season. I mean, it's got some great episodes like The Overmining, The Fugitive, The Audit, and especially Moo Moo, which I would consider one of the series' best. That being said though, I don't know. A lot of these episodes blend together for me to the extent I genuinely struggled on what episode I would consider the weakest. I did eventually come to a decision, however. I know some people might have put Captain Latvia here instead of Coral Palms Part 2, but honestly I kind of like Captain Latvia. I thought it was funny, and I liked the stuff with Charles and Jake. As for Part 2, well, here's the thing about this episode. In fact, here's the thing about the Coral Palms episodes in general. I don't particularly like the Coral Palms saga that much. I just could never get into these episodes. Maybe it's because I don't like Florida as any sane person would, or I think Viggs is just such a lame villain that I only know for two things. One is that his actor was in a talking cat, which means I no longer can take him seriously knowing that fact, and two, he has the worst line in the series.
I know you're here. I'm gonna kill you.
I have never seen anyone try so hard to be a bad guy since Max from Pacateo Island. Anyway, Part 2 is my least favorite for one reason, and it's actually not related to the main plot. I actually quite like it. No, the main reason why I dislike this episode so much is because of Gina. She's just such an insufferable bitch throughout the entire episode, and it's not funny, it's not entertaining, it just makes me want to turn off the episode. Yeah, if it's not clear by the amount of jabs I've taken at her, I really don't like the character of Gina. I understand she has her fans, and for what it's worth, I actually do like her interactions with Jake, and Chelsea Peretti was the perfect casting choice, especially since Andy Samberg and Chelsea are childhood friends. However, I don't see what's so funny about a character who's incredibly full of herself, constantly rude to her friends, sexually harasses Terry, and to top it all off, pretty much is the solution to everyone's problem and barely gets called out for anything she does. Essentially, she's the Ross of the Brooklyn Nine-Nine cast for me. This isn't her worst episode, trust me, there's an episode coming up that I do think is her worst, but she alone drags this episode down a whole lot to the extent I find it the weakest of the season. You know, I was initially really worried about having to choose a worst episode for Season 5, because Season 5 is often considered the show's best, and I highly agree. To put into perspective in how good this season is, if I were to do a top 10 list of the show's best episodes in my opinion, at least half of the list would be filled up with Season 5 episodes. That being said, however, I did come across the episode I definitely felt was the weakest. In DFW, Jake meets his half-sister for the first time only to find out she's a chaotic con woman, and he and Amy have to find a way to get rid of her. Meanwhile, Terry gets injured after performing yoga and gets stuck in Hitchcock and Scully's break room, and Gina tries to set Rosa up on a date. My thoughts on DFW is honestly much like my thoughts on Stakeout. It's fine. The Terry subplot is fine. The Rosa subplot is fine. The main plot is really where most of my issues come in. In particular, it's with the titular half-sister. Now, I will praise the performance. The performance is really good from the Sim Pedrad, I really hope that's how you pronounce it, but the character itself I just find really like she's just a con woman. A really chaotic con woman, and I don't really find her that funny. Speaking of funny, however, this is probably the best episode on the list for one particular reason, and do I need to tell you why? Yeah, I think this alone is why you need to see Season 5. Even if this is the weakest episode of the season to me, it still has probably the most iconic moment in the show's history. And you know what? That's pretty damn good. Oof, Season 6. Yeah, unlike Season 5 where there's a lot of really great episodes, Season 6 is just not great. Outside of the crime scene, Cinco de Mayo, and Honeymoon, I don't think any of the episodes this season I would consider that great. To make things worse, this season so far has the most episodes I would say are in contention for being the weakest, with 3. There's the episode I went with, Casecation, and 4 Movements. Casecation in particular has quite a few things wrong with it to the extent I want to go into why I think it's bad in another video, and 4 Movements at the very least would have been a fine send-off for Gina. Take note how I said would've. Return of the King is an episode that just confuses me more than anything because for the life of me, I cannot understand or even justify this episode's existence. So in this episode, Gina is revealed to be a social media influencer, so we can thank Gina for giving DreamWorks the idea to put that weird kid in that Megamind series. She needed Jake's and Terry's help to protect her at a ceremony because of a possible assassination attempt, but she's extremely distant with them much to Jake's anger. Meanwhile, Nikolaj,
Not even close. Nikolaj.
Charles's child, is possibly a genius, and Rosa gets stuck in the closet even though she came out last season. Wait, wrong fucking meaning. Okay, so my biggest problem this episode, aside from the fact it's a Gina episode, is that I don't see a reason for it existing. As much as I don't like 4 Movements, I thought it was a very Gino way to send off the character, and thus I was kinda satisfied. Return of the King just brings her back for some inexplicable reason, and I'm just like, huh? What's the point of having a character have a send-off episode only to return a few episodes later? I know some of you may say, oh, it's because Jake and Gina haven't gotten their closure yet. Bruh, the Tattler exists. Jake and Gina had closure there, and just a side tangent, it's honestly my favorite of Gina episodes because Gina actually gets called out for her nonsense and she has to confront her actions. The Tattler was more than an acceptable closure to Jake and Gina. The subplots are really nothing to write home about. The Nikolaj. Fuck it, I'm not doing this joke again. It's just really forgettable to me, and the Rosa subplot is not that interesting to me. Although, actually, there's a really good line from Rosa here.
And you can't spell go yourself without you.
I think that's a really good way to show just how good Brooklyn Nine-Nine really is. Even if the show puts out a weaker episode, there's at least one really good line or really good moment that makes the episode kind of worth it. At the same time, however, this episode just really doesn't need to exist at all. I think it's because Chelsea had 4 episodes in her contract this season, but if that's the case, why not do an episode before 4 movements? Yeah, this episode just has no reason to even exist. I'm not going to lie, Season 7 is the season that exists the most to me. It's admittedly my favorite out of the post-Fox era of the show, and it's got quite a few good episodes like Jimmy Jab Games 2, Ding Dong, Ransom, and my personal favorite, Lights Out. Actually, this season reminds me a bit of Season 2 because there's no episodes that really stick out to me as being outright bad, so I once again went with the episode that I consider the least good. In this episode, the precinct is introduced to their new commissioner, Captain Julie Kim. While she seems to be nice and friendly towards everyone, the squad is suspicious of her being part of Bunch's vendetta and decide to get evidence on her at a party. At said party are 2 subplots to take place, where Boyle becomes a rebel with the help of Rose's jacket, and Terry encounters a man he pulled away in prison as well as the catering staff, and thinks he's about to get revenge on him. I think the subplots are fine. I actually really like Terry's subplot because there was admittedly a part of me that thought the man he pulled away was actually going to go after him, as there's a lot of convicts in the show who end up in action scenes. He doesn't, however, and I can appreciate the subversion. Charles' plot was fine, nothing really special, kind of forgettable even, but I honestly didn't vibe too much with the main plot. Unlike the Terry plot, I could tell right away that Kim did mean well, and thus it was a shame to see the squad just invade her privacy like that. I know they had their reasons too, and I mean, considering the amount of shitty captains they had that weren't old, I get why. But at the same time, it's just a shame, especially since Julie is one, pretty damn likable, and she never makes an appearance again. Again, I don't hate this episode, and I understand why Julie only lasted 1 episode. It's a guest star, of course. But it's just the episode this season that has the most issues to me. Oh boy, Season 8. A lot of people consider it the weakest season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I couldn't agree more. As much as I like the last 2 episodes, and yes, I count the heist as a single episode instead of a 2-parter, just getting to that point felt like a chore. Despite this, there was actually a really easy pick on which episode I would say is not only the weakest in the season, but the worst in the whole series. In the good ones, Rosa quits the force in the midst of the George Floyd protest, becoming a private investigator and team up with Jake as he wants to prove he's one of the good ones. Meanwhile, Amy worries that she's becoming a stranger to hold, while Charles shows a lot of support for the African American community. Okay, so before I get into this, I have to make it abundantly clear that I don't think The Good Ones is bad because of the subject matter. Considering it's a show whose episodes are based in real time and New Girl, I do think it makes some sense adapting these events, and for what it's worth, the George Floyd stuff isn't bad, it's just the stuff around it I hate. Hell, to add on to this, I mentioned Moo Moo as one of the best episodes of Season 4, and I would again go as far as to say it's one of my all-time favorites. My biggest issue with this episode is a very simple one. It's not funny. It's super duper not funny. It's about as funny as a PSA meeting. That's not to say it doesn't attempt jokes, but the jokes they do attempt are either just very meh, or just downright cringeworthy. The Charles subplot especially just irks me to no end, primarily because Charles is just so obnoxious here. I know Charles is, again, not everyone's favorite character. Hell, I personally like him, and I think it's a crime he never won a heist, but this is easily his worst plot line because of how annoying he is. The whole Navy subplot I felt was kind of meh for me. I didn't really find it that enjoyable for the most part, although at least the end was shocking where Holden and Kevin were revealed to have separated. As for the main plot, man, I don't want to criticize it because I feel like its heart is in the right place, but I have to. It feels incredibly rushed, and yes, I am aware part of that is because of the real life events happening that force some rewrites, but the way this episode feels is like 3 episodes mashed together in some vain attempt to create a cohesive plot. This could have maybe been better as a 2-parter, but it's all just mashed in there. Hell, I would have had the season premiere start off with Rose's initial reaction to the George Floyd stuff while we have the Holt and Amy subplot. Then the second episode would be Jake and Rose's plot while we have the Charles subplot. Actually, speaking of the Charles subplot, the only part I actually kind of like about the episode itself is how the Charles subplot is resolved, where Terry just tells Charles to do the right thing. It's only because if you really think about it, it's referencing the Spike Lee film, and considering the subject matter, I think the reference is very fitting. But yeah, the good ones is definitely not one of them. It's actually the worst in my opinion. Well, there we go. Well, I believe it is the worst episode of every season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I think it's a good indicator of the show's quality when really there's only 3 episodes I talked about that I would say I flat out dislike. And yes, I mentioned that there's others I don't particularly like that much, but at the same time, a lot of them just come from specific seasons. I still like the show even if its move did cause the writing to suffer a bit, and hey, at least it went out with a bang. Well, that'll be it for me, and I'll see you in the next video. EternalOpossum out.